Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also, as my friend from St. John's East, don't intend to use the full 20 minutes. But we have been talking in this place this morning about parliamentary privilege and our roots in its Constitution, and I just wanted to review some of them. I do want to start by saying I appreciate the Speaker's ruling of prima facie finding of a breach of parliamentary privilege in the delays that occurred and in the indiscriminatory way that pedestrian travel and vehicular travel was stopped by the RCMP without regard to whether they were stopping members of Parliament who have a specific privilege to be able to access Parliament Hill and tourists or anyone else. We've already had some very good points made by other members. I'll just touch on them briefly, that the House of Commons security staff, the House of Commons security officers, and the Senate security officers know on site who is a member of Parliament, who belongs here, and who might be a stranger of whom they should take some note or be concerned. I certainly, in an event such as October 22nd, let's hope such an event never occurs again, have a great deal more confidence in the House of Commons security folks and officers, because they actually know which person in the room is a member of Parliament, which person is someone they've never seen before. Every day as I approach the House of Commons, on those days that it's not every day that I take a taxi, but when I do, I encounter obviously lovely young people working within the RCMP who don't know if I'm here to clean the floors of the building, wait on tables in the dining room, or might in fact be a member of Parliament. So I feel a lot more confidence in the House of Commons security system, and I have a lot of misgivings about the decisions that were made in the rushed through debate that took place here on February 6th. But I want to go back, and I also should note again that Bill C-59 will take that rushed debate and in omnibus fashion put in charge of security in the House of Commons for the first time in our entire history an RCMP officer, and not someone who, as my friend from St. John's East quite properly points out, should in fact and historically always has reported to the Speaker. When we talk about these privileges, the privilege that exists in the House of Commons, it has its roots in the preamble, the Constitution Act of 1867. It goes back, which calls for a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom. And parliamentary privilege was partially codified in 1689 in the UK Bill of Rights, in Article 9, in the First Acts of William and Mary, which has constitutional force in Canada. The freedom of speech, which is referred to in that section, was asserted at least as early as 1523. So when we stand in this place and say parliamentary privilege means something and has a long-standing tradition, we don't mean the last couple of years or the last couple of decades or even since 1867. We're talking about historical rooted parliamentary privilege that goes back to 1523. Prior to our own Confederation, and absent a specific grant from the Parliament of the United Kingdom, the common law principle was already well established that privileges were not just necessarily incidental to a legislature, and they were deemed to exist. In fact, parliamentary privilege today carries the same constitutional weight as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, we've had some litigation and court actions which have further established and ferreted out the questions, and it is difficult. If an event occurs in the House of Commons, it's not the same as saying that we as members of Parliament have some sort of diplomatic immunity, that if one were to assault another, there are no laws to cover this. We are not a law unto ourselves here in Parliament, and that was established in the Vade decision, which dealt with a human rights concern of a former employee of the Speaker and a concern about whether discrimination had taken place. Parliamentary privilege does not extend so far as to say that we can't exert rights that we have under other laws in this place. But I did find it interesting in going through some research, Mr. Speaker, to find that, and this was a finding of one of our great constitutional law experts at this place, Joseph Mango, who looked back to when parliamentary privilege was asserted in terms of our security. And this example comes from 1866, when there was a physical altercation between an assistant librarian and a member of Parliament. Now, I can't imagine such a thing happening today, but in any case, the member of Parliament raised it in the House, and the Speaker's remarks make it very clear what the role of the Speaker is in security in this place. So I'm just going to cite from this, Mr. Speaker. It's found at page 140 of the Parliamentary Privilege in Canada of that book. citing the Journal of the Province of Canada from August 1, 1866, from which the Speaker said, quote, "It is a power incidental to the Constitution of this House to preserve peace and order within the precincts and protect members of it from insults and assault. This power is necessary not only to ensure the freedom of action of members, but that freedom of discussion, which is one of their fundamental rights." I point out, Mr. Speaker, it's not just votes, once again. I want to underscore this point. One of our, according to the most early finding of parliamentary privilege by a Canadian speaker, makes it very clear that freedom of discussion is one of our fundamental rights. So if we were prevented, even by seconds, from taking up a spot in a speaking order, and we all know as parliamentarians how easily one can find an opportunity for speaking, come to this place to enter a debate, such as this morning. We did not know when we showed up this morning from the government orders that Mr. Speaker, that the Speaker would have ready for us a finding on points of privilege raised earlier by members of the NDP. We adjust ourselves, we come here, and we want to, and I want as a parliamentarian, passionately to embrace the principles of this place and to respect the supremacy of Parliament at all times. One of our fundamental, most fundamental privileges as parliamentarians, and one of our fundamental rights as parliamentarians, is freedom of discussion. If we are impeded in that, then our rights are infringed and democracy is violated. Now, that was a finding from 1866. We know that in the past number of years, the Privileges and Elections Committee of the Canadian House of Commons has always ruled that police forces coming onto the precinct on official business require permission of the Speaker. So, not to belabor the points, I think everyone in this House knows that the exclusive privilege of the House has been to regulate proceedings within its own walls is a fundamental principle that must be respected. Now, if we're making changes, and clearly from the rushed debate and subsequent vote of early February to now the rushed omnibus bill of C-59 with changes to create a parliamentary security for parliamentary precincts with a director who shall always be under law a member of the RCMP, therefore not reporting to the Speaker. These are not arcane changes. These are not small matters. If we are to think forward, Mr. Speaker, to another era, because as I agree with my friends who have earlier pointed out, this is not a partisan matter. This is a question of constitution. So another executive could be comprised of a party that doesn't even exist at this point in our parliamentary discourse, so no one should take offense. But what if we had a prime minister someday who decided that it would be convenient to stop members of opposition parties from getting to a House for votes and was able to ask the RCMP to make it so? There's a fundamental principle of democracy that requires that the privilege of Parliament and the protection of our rights and privileges in this place vests in the Speaker and never in a Prime Minister. We are, at this very moment, going through a fundamental transition which is a breach with all principles and all tradition going back at more than 500 years. And we're doing it in a rushed fashion. And that strikes me, Mr. Speaker, as wrong prima facie. We have an opportunity today to see that this issue of it comes to its crystallization in a couple of events that could be dismissed as minor. But, Mr. Speaker, I urge you, and I urge all my colleagues in this place to find that conflict of RCMP officers stopping members of Parliament from getting to Parliament Hill is not trivial. It's the crystallization of a very dangerous change, which we will not adequately discuss in omnibus bill fashion, but which the PROC could look at, could call witnesses. I would urge us to vote to send this to PROC and to request, for instance, that we hear expert witnesses, including our former Sergeant-at-Arms, current Ambassador to Ireland, Kevin Vickers. I would wish to hear his best advice. When we rushed through discussion on February 6th, Mr. Speaker, I remember it very clearly. Every time that any of us in the opposition raised concerns that it was a mistake to consolidate security of the House of Commons and the parliamentary precinct overall, into the RCMP's hands without disrespect to that agency, but on constitutional grounds. The response from many members of the Conservative Party was, well, surely we can all agree, and the Auditor General said so some years ago, that we need to have a consolidation and better integration of security on Parliament Hill. I don't think anyone disagreed with that. The question is, who gets to be in charge of that improved security? Why not have the speakers of the House and the Speaker of the Senate be in control, as we have always been, of a consolidated force where the Sergeant-at-Arms of this place is in charge not just of the physical building, but of the grounds? Why should we have a decision that overturns centuries of constitutional divisions that have a very real democratic purpose? That where we meet with the privileges and protections of our rights and liberties and freedoms, that the protection of those rights and liberties and freedoms be vested in the Speaker and never in the executive branch. It's a fundamental question. And now that we have the opportunity through these, what might be dismissed as minor incidents, but I urge all members to find, they give us the opportunity to have proper discussion, thorough review, call the right witnesses. Do not allow C-59 as an omnibus budget bill to blast through and create permanent changes, or at least changes until some future government can repeal them, but really the dismantling of a system that has worked us and served us very well. I do want, again, to close my remarks by thanking the House of Commons security officers, the Senate security officers. These are the officers that, particularly in the House of Commons on October 22nd, risked their lives, did the most to protect us. And although, as other members have noted, we don't have reports from what happened on that day, we do know that the gunman was stopped at the door by an unarmed House security guard, Samir Nassan, that he wrestled with the gunman. He stopped what could have been a much worse event by giving others the chance to prepare themselves. I mean no disrespect to the RCMP, but they did not notice someone running by them with a gun. And when they saw a limo and a chauffeur being removed from his car and a hijacked vehicle moving up to center block, I know there were, it's hindsight to say, why didn't they put on their sirens? But we know there was no warning to our internal security force from our external security force. And I just want one more time before closing to say again how deeply I know all of us in this place are grateful to our former Sergeant-at-Arms and the entire security team in this place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.